Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second event and the first virtual art tour of the Multiple Sclerosis Association of America's Fall 2023 Improving Lives Through Art series. My name is Joe Caliva, and I am excited and honored to be your docent and guide once again this season. And tonight's tour will be extra special because we will be celebrating the 3-year anniversary of the very first virtual art night that MSAA hosted, and for which I was lucky enough to be the virtual tour guide. On that night, I presented a special look inside the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, where I work as a docent. And during that tour, I gave everyone a little bit of history about our founder, Albert C. Barnes, talked about his unique philosophy of art and of displaying the pieces in the galleries, and highlighted some of the most famous works that we have in the collection. The success of that event led to the creation of the Improving Lives Through Art series, and I am so incredibly fortunate and grateful to still be your host and guide. So tonight, in celebration of the 3-year anniversary of that special night, I thought I would take you back to the Barnes Foundation and present once again the tour that started it all. If you didn't get to attend that virtual art night 3 years ago, this is your chance to see the tour now. If you were there for the original tour, this tour is a shortened or modified version and will seem very familiar. It'll be a good recap and brush up of your knowledge of the Barnes Foundation. But tonight, in keeping with our theme of the ILTA virtual tours, of presenting artists who had to overcome extraordinary challenges to improve their lives and their wellness through art, I will also talk a little bit about a very special artist that we have here at the Barnes Foundation, the Belarusian-Jewish born painter Chaïm Soutine, an expressionist artist who had to overcome challenging physical, emotional, and cultural barriers to improve his life through art. So I hope you're as excited as I am and ready for a great night of art and history. And before we begin, I would like to hand the mic over, as always, to our fearless leader, the President and CEO of MSAA, Ms. Gina Murdoch, for a few special words to get the night started. Gina?
Thank you so much for joining us for our first tour of the Improving Lives Through Art Fall series. We are so thrilled to have you with us tonight and know you're truly going to enjoy seeing the amazing art presented. Our thanks to Joe Caliva, our docent and tour guide for this event. I'm so thrilled to be back at the Barnes Foundation alongside of all of you where the Improving Lives Through Art series began. Please know that MSAA could not continue to provide programs and services to meet the needs of the MS community without your support. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Sandoz, our sponsor for this evening, for their incredible and continuing support. So we are back at the Barnes. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you so much, Gina. And before we get started, I'd like to remind all of you about the other ILTA events coming up this season. First, mark your calendars and don't miss our next paint-along on Tuesday, November 14th. MSAA Art Showcase artist Omaira Rivera-Filardi will be returning once again to guide all of us in creating another beautiful painting. And this one will be winter themed, just in time for the holidays. Once again, that's Tuesday, November 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you can go to mymsaa.org for more information. And after virtually visiting the European countries of Italy and France last season, I will return once again on Tuesday, December 12th for the final event of this fall 2023 season to continue our journeys abroad with a stop in Poland, my new home away from home. We'll concentrate primarily on the capital city of Warsaw and feature 2 artists who are incredible examples of lives improved through art. visual artist Zdzisław Bekzinski, and our very first musical artist to be featured in the ILTA series, composer and pianist Frédéric Chopin, for which I will get to perform a couple pieces for you on the piano that you see over my shoulder. That's Tuesday, December 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and once again, more information can be found at mymsaa.org. And finally, I'd like to echo Gina's gratitude to our diamond sponsor, Sandoz, for not only making tonight's event possible, but the entire Improving Lives Through Art series as well. Thank you to Sandoz for your ongoing support of MSAA. One last thing. After the presentation tonight, I will be giving all of you the chance to unmute your cameras and microphones if you want to, and join in the discussion. I'll also be happy to discuss or answer any questions you have. But I encourage you to write in the chat any questions you think about during the presentation so you don't forget them later. And of course, feel free to post comments in the chat throughout the presentation to interact with the other viewers tonight. For example, go ahead right now if you haven't done so already and put in the chat where you're watching from tonight, and I'll give you a shout out a little bit later. Also, just like I did last season, I'll be hosting a little game of trivia tonight after the presentation. And the winner of tonight's trivia game will win a free ticket to next month's Paint Along with Omaira Rivera-Filardi. A great prize, so pay close attention tonight and jot down some notes to improve your chances of winning. The trivia is a little easier to play if you have a second device nearby. So if you're watching this on your computer, keep your smartphone or tablet handy. If you're watching on your smartphone, keep a tablet near you. It's still possible to play without a second device, but you'll have to switch between your web browser window and the Zoom window. All right, so without any further delay, let's head back to the Barnes Foundation. First, let's start with a brief history. The Barnes Foundation is actually a private collection of art that was purchased and secured by a man named Albert C. Barnes over about a 40-year period between 1912 and 1951. He created the Barnes Foundation as an educational institution in 1922, about 10 years after he started collecting. And that same year, he purchased a 12-acre arboretum in Marion, Pennsylvania, a small suburb which is about 9 miles from the current location in Philadelphia, and built a gallery there to hold his quickly growing art collection. This is the original building, which was completed in 1925, and the collection was housed here for over 80 years. But in 2012, in order to better serve the art and Dr. Barnes's educational mission, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the collection was moved to its current location in Philadelphia. This new location is in an area now that is much more accessible to a lot more people. Also, the collection is displayed in this new location exactly as Dr. Barnes left it in the original gallery at the time of his death in 1951. And that is very important to remember for reasons which you'll learn a little later. All right, so let's talk about this dashing young man. This is Dr. Albert C. Barnes, many, many years ago. He was born right here in Philadelphia in 1872. And as a child, he did have an interest in art and did show some talent as an artist, but decided not to pursue art by the time he got to high school, where he focused mainly on scientific subjects instead. But while he was in high school, he became friends with another student by the name of William Glackens, who was a very talented artist. Keep his name in mind because he's going to come up again a little later in our conversation, because he played a major role in Barnes's passion for art collecting many years after they graduated high school together. So after high school, Barnes obtained a degree as a medical doctor from the University of Pennsylvania, but he never practiced. He never became a physician or a family doctor. Instead, he pursued pharmacology, and along with a German chemist by the name of Hermann Hill, he created a pharmaceutical company for an antiseptic treatment they called Argerol, which was used to prevent eye infections in newborn infants. Argerol made Dr. Barnes a very rich man, and 30 years after starting the company, he sold it in 1929, and the proceeds he made from the sale allowed him to never have to worry about working again. And it allowed him to concentrate instead on his passion for collecting art. But going back to 1912, that year, Barnes reconnected with his old high school friend, William Glackens. And by that time, Glackens had established himself as one of the foremost illustrators and painters in America. Also during that year, Barnes was becoming increasingly more interested in art, and he saw this rekindled friendship with Glackens as an opportunity. Later in 1912, he gave Glackens a $20,000 line of credit and sent him to France to purchase as many works as he could that were the best examples of this new modern style, these new modern techniques of painting he had been hearing so much about, Impressionism and this post-Impressionism thing. So Glackens took the money, of course, and headed to Paris and returned with 33 paintings, many of which are still on display in the collection today. Remarkably, this first group of paintings included works by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Camille Pissarro, Denis, Van Gogh, Sisley, Le Bourg, Pablo Picasso, and Paul Cézanne. Today, there are thousands of pieces in the collection, and not just paintings. It also includes African art and masks, Native American jewelry, Greek antiquities, and decorative metalwork. Most notably, there are 181 works by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, 180 paintings and 1 sculpture. It's the largest collection of Renoirs in the world. There are also 69 works by Paul Cézanne, 59 by Henri Matisse, and 46 by Pablo Picasso. Now, I mention those 4 artists because Barnes referred to them as the 4 pillars of the collection. There's hardly a gallery in the collection that you can walk through where you don't see several works by one or all of these gentlemen. So during this tour tonight, you'll be hearing a lot about their work. Now, when Barnes first received these original paintings, something unexpected happened. He didn't know what to make of them. These new vibrant colors and abstract shapes were very unusual, maybe even a bit jarring, to someone who had only seen mostly American art, which at that time was much more traditional and academic. But this confused Dr. Barnes. He immediately thought that this had to be some sort of scientific problem that needed to be solved. What was he not seeing that the rest of the world was seeing? So, being a man of science, he started to think of a more scientific, objective way to look at art in order to learn how to appreciate it. Now, being a chemist, Barnes was certainly familiar with the chemical periodic table of elements. But what Barnes learned was that there is also a table of elements in art. The artistic table of elements consists of things like line, shape, color, pattern, texture. Artists use these elements and combine them in different ways to illustrate an idea or express a human quality, or sometimes just combine them for different decorative purposes. Barnes thought that by concentrating on these elements when looking at art, it could help him and other people understand and appreciate art more thoroughly. He decided to concentrate on what he considered to be the 4 main elements of art, which are color, light, line, and space. He thought that by using these four elements, a viewer can obtain the vocabulary they needed to talk about, evaluate, explore, and appreciate art. So let's see how he did that. And we'll use one of the pieces in the collection by one of our four pillars, Pablo Picasso. This painting is titled The Ascetic. It was painted in 1903 during what was called Picasso's Blue Period, for obvious reasons. So there's no better place to start than with the element of color. During this period, Picasso pursued themes of suffering and alienation, and the subjects of his paintings were very often the sick, the blind, the imprisoned, and other marginalized people with whom he greatly identified in the early years of his career, when he was struggling himself. Blue is described by many artists as a cool color. So using this much of it, in my opinion, expresses a feeling of coldness or sadness. We use the term "I'm feeling blue" when we're sad, so I think Picasso's predominant use of blue in this painting is for obvious reasons. Let's take a look at how he uses the element of light in this painting. If we look at the shadows he painted, we can tell that the light comes from the man's right side, casting this large shadow on the wall behind him. And most notably, the dark shadows on his cheeks, under his cheekbones. I think Picasso placed the light where he did for a very specific reason, to further illustrate this man's frailty with those dark shadows in his hollow cheeks. Let's move on to how Picasso uses the element of line in this painting. The lines of the man's body are drawn very long and narrow, making the figure look more emaciated, with a sunken torso and extremely thin arms. Also, the way the man is seated or posed make his arms and body form very straight vertical lines. If we look at the edge of the table where he's sitting, that forms a very straight horizontal line. This is important to note because artists use vertical and horizontal lines to make a subject look static or still or lacking energy. But I also find it interesting that Picasso uses line to paint the man's neck so thick, with these additional lines in his neck that show more of his musculature. I'm not sure why, but I think maybe he did this to show that the man was once stronger or more viable before his asceticism or life choices took their toll on him. Finally, let's look at how Picasso uses the element of space in this painting. That shadow on the wall that I mentioned earlier illustrates that the wall is directly behind the man. And we can tell he's right up against the edge of the table, metaphorically between a rock and a hard place. This places the man in what we call a very shallow space, which I feel conveys the quality of confinement or claustrophobia. The man seems wedged between the wall and the edge of the table, and maybe even trapped there. So let's try this with a different set of paintings. These two paintings are both by another of the four pillars, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and both are simply titled Landscape. The one on the left was painted in 1917, and the one on the right was painted about 15 years earlier, between 1900 and 1905. These two paintings are both great examples of Renoir's transition from the Impressionist style, which he helped create, and which you can see in the painting on the right, to a more post-Impressionist style in the painting on the left. Impressionists concentrated on the exploration of the effects of light on color and accurately representing color by painting outdoors. But the post-impressionists, like Renoir, used freer, looser brushstrokes and used color more expressively to capture their emotional reaction to a scene or a subject. You can see how thick and loose the brushstrokes are in this painting, and the vibrant, expressive use of color. And even though there is much less detail than in more traditional paintings, we can still see a stream, the sky, a tree line, and it's much easier to see those things if you step back from the painting. So let's take a closer look at how Renoir uses the element of color in these pieces. In both of these paintings, in contrast to the Picasso painting we just saw, Renoir uses a much broader palette of colors. There is no one predominant color. As many of you know, I've been a musician all my life, and in musical terms, I would describe the Picasso painting as being similar to a string quartet or a jazz trio, using only a few instruments. These Renoir landscapes I would describe as a symphony of colors. The use of this broad palette of colors, in my opinion, expresses vibrance, vitality, and life. Let's look at Renoir's use of light. Now, unlike the Picasso, you might have noticed that Renoir didn't really paint any shadows in these scenes. And because of that, we can't really determine the direction from which the light is coming, like we were able to do in the Picasso painting. This creates the feeling that the light is coming from everywhere and is surrounding everything. With his use of line, again in contrast to the Picasso, instead of those long, straight, narrow, vertical and horizontal lines, Renoir uses much shorter diagonal lines. You can see this in the trunks and branches of the trees, in the skyline of the trees and the mountains, in the direction of the stream and the angle of the grass line. All of these diagonal lines create a wonderful sense of movement and energy, and leads the viewer's eyes in all different directions around the canvas. Finally, let's look at Renoir's use of space in these paintings. Once again, in contrast to the Picasso painting, these paintings illustrate deep space. Through his use of linear perspective, which you see in the stream and the path of the trees, as well as his use of atmospheric perspective, which you can see as the colors fade and lose detail as they move further into the distance, Renoir creates a space that feels infinite, making the viewers feel as though they're looking back as far as their eyes can see. Let's try this with one more painting. This piece is titled Woman on a Red Sofa, simply enough, and it's by yet another one of our four pillars, Henri Matisse, and he painted this work between 1919 and 1920. Let's look at his use of color in this painting. Now, similar to the Picasso, Matisse does use a predominant color, but in this case, it's red. And in contrast to the blue, red is considered a warm color, expressing life or passion. Let's look at his use of light. Now, similar to the Renoir paintings, the light is coming from everywhere. We can't determine the direction of the light because there aren't any shadows at all. In video or photography, this is referred to as high-key lighting. It makes the image brighter and is more flattering to the subject since there are not shadows to bring out any lines or wrinkles. You see this a lot more recently with influencers and content creators all looking through that very bright ring light to appear more flattering and remove any shadows from unwanted lines on their face. Now, in his use of line, Matisse uses many diagonal lines in this painting, similar to the Renoir paintings. And in contrast to the Picasso portrait and the way he has the man seated and posed, this woman is posed and seated diagonally. The sofa is painted on a diagonal slant. The top of the dresser forms a diagonal plane. Even the blue colors painted into the woman's dress create additional diagonal lines. But I think the most interesting use of line in this painting is the repeated swirly line patterns throughout the carpet surrounding the woman. This pattern of swirly lines surrounds the subject even more with a feeling of movement and energy. And the pattern moves across the painting from left to right. So it moves your eyes around the canvas even more. And finally, looking at how Matisse uses space in these paintings, similar to the Picasso, this is also an indoor scene, but the space is nowhere near as shallow, so we don't get that sense of being closed in or trapped. Simply by including the bed behind her and the dresser to the woman's left, we feel like there's a lot more room to breathe. Now, let's do something different and take a look at all four of these paintings we just viewed at the same time. When we look at different paintings grouped together like this, it changes the dynamic or the characteristics of the individual paintings. In this grouping, for example, all that red in the Matisse painting that we see up near the top actually complements and balances all the blue in the Picasso painting beneath it. The diagonal lines in the Matisse balance the horizontal and vertical lines of the Picasso. The Renoir paintings add more colors and energy to the indoor scenes and seated figures in the Matisse and Picasso paintings. The deep space in the Renoir paintings create a nice contrast to the more shallow spaces in the Picasso and Matisse. It's interesting to explore and find all these different dynamics and characteristics. Barnes also realized this, and it gave him an idea. Why not hang the paintings on the wall like this? And while I'm at it, I'll add my own sense of deeper space by placing some three-dimensional objects on the wall, like this bench, which also looks like it could be the bench on the other side of the table across from the man in the Picasso painting, creating what Dr. Barnes called a visual connection to that painting. These wood bird sculptures, which look like they could have come out of the Renoir nature landscapes, again creating even more visual connections. This copper pot, which looks very similar in color to the pitcher in the Picasso painting, add some decorative metalwork, and you have what Dr. Barnes called an ensemble. The word ensemble might be a little more familiar to you when talking about music. It's used to describe a group of instruments or musicians. An orchestra, for example, is an ensemble. A choir or a chorus is an ensemble. And the instruments or voices in an ensemble each have their own characteristics. A violin is very lyrical and melodic. A trumpet is majestic sounding and very strong. A clarinet is somber and mellow. But when you combine those three instruments, they create what we know as harmony, which also creates an entirely new dynamic or characteristic. That's exactly what Dr. Barnes is doing here, combining the individual characteristics of all these pieces and creating a visual harmony. Some of these ensembles, like this one, are relatively small and consist of only a few pieces. We see here that this ensemble only takes up about half of one wall, with a different ensemble on the other side. Other ensembles, however, take up an entire wall, like one of my favorites, which is in Gallery 14, right through this door. So let's head in there and check it out. As you can see right away, this is a much larger ensemble, taking up an entire wall. But similar to the last ensemble we just viewed, and similar to most of the ensembles throughout the collection, this one has one large anchor painting right in the center, and the rest of the pieces are all symmetrically arranged around it. Now, a more traditional museum or gallery might look something like this. Only one single row of paintings hung in a straight line, a lot of negative space on the wall, information cards hung next to the paintings. But Dr. Barnes displays his collection in multiple rows, also including artisanal pieces in wood and metal to create even more visual connections with the paintings. He also mixes artists from many different artistic periods. On this wall alone, there are artists from every period between the Renaissance in the 1500s and the early 20th century. Barnes also didn't include information cards on or around the art. When Dr. Barnes learned that when most people visit a museum, they spend more time reading the information cards than looking at the art, he got rid of them. Barnes didn't want his viewers to concentrate on who painted something, or why they painted it, or what they used to paint it. He wanted his viewers to view all the works in an ensemble as objects that all somehow relate to one another, to think critically and discover the links that unite all these pieces, the bridges between the traditional and the modern, the old and the new. Part of what fueled this educational mission in Dr. Barnes and the decision to display his art in this manner was meeting this man, Dr. John Dewey. Dewey was an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer whose ideas were very influential in education and social reform at the time. He believed that education and critical thinking were fundamental to democracy and maintaining a democratic society. The two met at a seminar at Columbia University in 1917, becoming close friends and collaborators spanning more than 3 decades. Barnes was so moved and inspired by Dewey's philosophy that he began teaching classes on art and philosophy to his workers in his Argerol factory before he sold it. Later, he expanded his educational mission to more people and began holding classes right inside the galleries. Barnes referred to his ensembles and the walls in his galleries as teaching walls, using them almost like blackboards to teach his students about his philosophy of art. This focus on education is still to this day one of the core missions of the Barnes Foundation. And around the same time that Barnes met Dewey, to further his understanding of Western art and more deeply explore his educational philosophy, Barnes became very interested in African art. And between 1922 and 1924, he made 5 large purchases of African objects. He was one of the first American art collectors to display African objects in his galleries along with the paintings and other Western European artworks. Part of the reason for this was to demonstrate how many Western European artists were heavily influenced by African art in the early 20th century. And after you observe the characteristics of African art, like the pieces Dr. Barnes included in this display case, you can easily see the similarities in the paintings included in this ensemble, like with these 2 paintings by Pablo Picasso, with the almond-shaped eyes and heads, triangular noses, and the foreheads peaking in a sharp point. And in the 2 larger paintings on this wall by an Italian painter named Amedeo Modigliani. Discovering African art transformed Modigliani's work and helped define the style for which he later became known, which we can easily see in these 2 portraits, both of which were painted between 1918 and 1919. Dr. Barnes purchased most of his African pieces from a man named Paul Guillaume, one of the most famous and well-respected art dealers in Paris at the time. And besides the African pieces, Barnes also purchased from Guillaume many paintings from artists like Amedeo Modigliani, Paul Cézanne, Renoir, and Pablo Picasso. But it was in 1923, during one of his trips to Paris to visit Guillaume, when a vibrantly colored, uniquely painted work sitting in Guillaume's gallery by an unknown artist caught the attention of Dr. Barnes. This piece, titled The Pastry Chef. The artist was a struggling young Jewish painter named Chaïm Soutine, who arrived in Paris 10 years earlier in 1913. Barnes was so impressed by the painting, he asked to meet Soutine and see more of his work. Soutine's paintings left such a mark on Barnes, he did something completely unexpected and rarely seen in the art world at the time, and purchased 54 paintings by this unknown artist, immediately plucking him out of obscurity and changing his life forever. This unprecedented move by Dr. Barnes catapulted Soutine into fame and notoriety in the Parisian art world and introduced him to the American art scene. 21 of those original 54 paintings still hang in our galleries. But who was Chaïm Soutine, and why did his work have such a profound impact on Dr. Barnes? Well, as we'll see in the next part of this tour, Chaïm Soutine's life was almost a treatise on Dr. Barnes's philosophy of art, the very definition of bridging the gap between tradition and modernism. Chaïm Soutine was born in 1893 in what was then the Russian Empire. His family lived in a small settlement called Smilovici in what was called the Minsk Governorate of the Russian Empire, what is known today as the country of Belarus. Not much is known about his childhood, but we do know that Chaïm Soutine was the 10th of 11 children born to a devout Orthodox Jewish family. His father was a tailor and a strict disciplinarian. Even though Chaïm began to draw at an early age and show signs of his talent as an artist, his father wanted him to become a tailor and discouraged him from drawing. In fact, his father was a deeply religious man and well educated in Talmudic studies. Chaïm grew up surrounded by a rich Jewish religious life with an emphasis on religious observances and lifelong learning. But it was the strict adherence to Orthodox customs that almost cost the young Soutine his life. Sometime around 1907, at about 14 years of age, Chaïm drew a portrait of an old man who lived in his village. This was a serious transgression in his Orthodox Jewish community, which strictly forbade representation of the human figure. When the old man's sons learned about the portrait, they became so enraged, they beat the young boy so badly, it took him weeks to recover. Chaïm's mother filed a complaint for the extremely cruel attack on her son, and the old man and his sons were ordered to pay the Soutine family 15 rubles. But there was very little justice. The villagers were still very angry with Chaïm over the drawing, so his parents thought it would be best to send him away. They used the 15 rubles they were awarded in the lawsuit to send Chaïm to stay with his sister, who lived in Minsk. He would never again return to his home village of Smilovici. In 1909, Chaïm left for Minsk, and while he was there, he worked as a photo retoucher and started to attend drawing lessons at the Minsk School of Drawing, which was founded by a fellow Belarusian artist named Yakov Kruger. In 1910, he moved from Minsk to Lithuania, in the capital city of Vilna, an important Jewish cultural center. There, he studied art and photography at the Academy of Fine Arts, along with a friend he made in Minsk, a fellow artist named Michel Kikoin. Kikoin recalled years later that Soutine was one of the most brilliant students at the Academy. The subjects of his sketches always carried a suggestion of morbid sadness. Unfortunately, there are no known surviving works by Chaïm Soutine from this period. But in 1913, after 3 years of study in Lithuania, Chaïm and Michel Kikoin decided to move to the art capital of the world to continue their studies, Paris, France. Both artists were inspired and influenced by the art that was being made in Paris and wanted desperately to be part of it. The first known photograph of Chaïm Soutine is in the identification paper he obtained upon his arrival in Paris. Sadly, though, in 1913, there was a rising tide of anti-Semitism in Paris, particularly among art critics who saw the large number of foreign artists, most of them Jewish, as a threat to the purity of French art. Years later, critics would group these artists in what they called the École de Paris, or the School of Paris, meant to be a derogatory term for what they saw as the mostly Jewish-influenced movements in the Parisian art world. But these artists all supported and helped each other. For example, Kikoin helped get Chaïm a room to stay here at an apartment building called La Ruche, which means the beehive, a popular complex where struggling artists, many of them immigrants from Russia or Eastern Europe, could live and work for very little rent. It got its name due to its circular shape, which resembles a beehive more than an apartment complex. It was here, in fact, where Chaïm met and became friends with Amedeo Modigliani, who was also from a Jewish family. Modigliani became a strong supporter and mentor to Chaïm and painted 2 of his most famous portraits using Chaïm as the model. Soutine also enrolled at the famous studio of Fernand Cormon at the Studio of Fine Arts, or the École des Beaux-Arts. There, he met many other artists who had a big influence on him. But perhaps his biggest influence came from his regular visits to the Louvre in Paris. Chaïm would spend countless hours walking the many halls and galleries of this largest museum in the world to study the work of the masters. He was particularly drawn to the work of the Baroque Dutch master Rembrandt van Rijn, and Rembrandt's focus on common, everyday people, and his dramatic use of light. In fact, Chaïm would often use Rembrandt's paintings as inspiration for his own work, paying homage to the master, but applying his own modern interpretation. One of his favorite paintings at the Louvre was this painting of King Charles VII by the early Renaissance French painter Jean Fouquet. Chaïm was drawn to the way Fouquet portrayed the king as a normal, real person without any excessive regal ornaments, but still gave him an air of the divine through the use of the red coat. Scholars often cite this painting by Chaïm Soutine of his friend, the sculptor Oskar Mieszkaninow, as emulating those qualities that he saw in the Fouquet painting. But I believe that here at the Barnes Foundation, we have a painting that seems to even more closely resemble the painting by Fouquet. This portrait, titled Woman with Round Eyes. Soutine uses the familiar conventions of portraiture that you can see in the Fouquet painting. Notice the folded hands and the three-quarter view pose. But he also uses red to elevate the status of this common woman, giving her an air of nobility. But then Soutine explodes tradition with the use of more vibrant colors and waves of thickly applied paint in broad brushstrokes. If we go back to this ensemble at the Barnes Foundation that we viewed a few minutes ago, Dr. Barnes also hangs one of his Soutine portraits on this wall, along with portraits by the Italian Renaissance painter Jacopo Robusti, or Tintoretto, and the 19th century French realism painter Gustave Courbet, to show how Soutine drew influence from the traditional portraits of these earlier masters, but then pushed the boundaries of those traditions with his use of line, shape, and color. On an adjacent wall in this gallery, Barnes also included this painting by another 19th century French artist, Honoré Daumier, to show the possible influence for Soutine's style of simplifying forms and shapes. In fact, Dr. Barnes once wrote, "From Daumier is derived Soutine's method of so simplifying and distorting objects that they sometimes appear monstrous or grotesque, but are nevertheless convincing in their essential reality." But as Chaïm's friend Michel Kikowin once wrote, there is an undeniable sadness in Soutine's work. From different accounts by people who knew him, Soutine lived a desperate life of poverty, anxiety, and timidness. By other accounts, Soutine had a volatile temperament, often giving in to fits of anger or suffering long periods of depression. These struggles seem to pour out onto Soutine's canvases. Technically and artistically, his paintings push the boundaries of convention even further than other artists before him, like Paul Cézanne or Vincent van Gogh. But emotionally, his work was an expression of the inner turmoil he constantly faced due to fear, anxiety, and depression, laying the very groundwork for the movement in art that came to be known as abstract expressionism. His first 10 years in Paris were certainly a struggle, but all of that was about to change when in 1923, inspired in part by paintings like this one by the realism artist William Orpin, Soutine decided to put his own spin on the same subject. With his characteristically thick textured brushstrokes, bold, loose flowing lines, incredibly vibrant colors, and simplified, distorted shapes, Soutine created an expressionist masterpiece that would change his life forever. After Dr. Barnes purchased The Pastry Chef and 53 of his other paintings, Soutine became a household name in Paris. And for the first time in his life, he was able to live in relative financial security and comfort. But a couple years later, partly due to the fame that Dr. Barnes helped create, Soutine went on to create his most well-known work and his most infamous. Inspired by one of the paintings he studied at the Louvre by Rembrandt, titled A Slaughtered Ox, Soutine decided to replicate the painting, but not by copying Rembrandt's painting, but actually buying a whole side of beef, hanging it in his studio, and painting it from life. I almost don't have to tell you what happened next. His assistant at the time recalled that after a few days, huge blue flies were swarming around the beef inside the studio, And of course, a few days later, neighbors filed a complaint because of the foul odor filling the building. When the health authorities came to take away the beef, Soutine's assistant pleaded with them and explained that the painting wasn't finished. And remarkably, the authorities helped Soutine come up with a method to inject the beef with formaldehyde so that he can continue painting. The trouble was well worth it. Despite the gruesome subject matter, the piece is a colorful, vibrant reimagining and abstract expressionist interpretation of the Baroque masterpiece by Rembrandt. But this is not the only carcass painting that Soutine created. Back in this gallery at the Barnes Foundation, across from the woman with round eyes portrait, we have another Soutine carcass painting titled Flayed Rabbit. Like many expressionist artists, Soutine seems to be trying to find beauty among the grotesque, some kind of comfort or peace after suffering or pain. In fact, Soutine painted many carcass or dead animal paintings such as these, including this one, which is yet another reimagining or interpretation of a painting he saw frequently at the Louvre by the French painter Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin. And nobody can say for certain why Soutine painted so many portraits such as these. Some believe it was a morbid fascination. Others argue that the subjects cost much less than live models and were much easier to paint since they didn't move. But I believe Soutine explained why he painted so many of these animals when he recalled a traumatic experience he had during his youth in Russia. He said, "Once I saw the village butcher slice the neck of a bird and drain the blood out of it. I wanted to cry out, but the butcher's joyful expression caught the sound in my throat. This cry, I always feel it there. When I painted the beef carcass, it was still this cry that I wanted to liberate. I still have not succeeded." Shortly after he arrived in Paris in 1913, Soutine started to experience severe stomach or abdominal pain. This was most likely due to stomach ulcers that were made worse by stress, poor diet, and heavy drinking. The pain was so severe at times, he wouldn't be able to paint. But his art did offer him the motivation to change his diet, and the notoriety he enjoyed after Dr. Barnes purchased so many of his pieces helped him get the medical attention he needed to control the pain and continue working. Between 1923 and 1940, Soutine enjoyed a successful career and the patronage of many admirers and supporters. But then, in May 1940, only 8 months after the start of World War II, Hitler's army marched into France. And just 1 month later, on June 14th, 1940, Paris fell into the hands of the Nazis. Jews in Paris were forced to wear the Yellow Star of David badge, as was Soutine, and were barred from certain professions and entering public places. After suffering from religious abuse in his childhood and religious discrimination as an artist in France, Soutine now faced becoming a victim of the worst possible type of religious persecution: genocide. He escaped from Paris to avoid arrest by the Gestapo and spent the next 3 years, with the help of friends, moving from one hiding place to another. By some accounts, as things continued to escalate, Soutine was sometimes forced to seek shelter in forests, sleeping outdoors. His painting offered him some solace during this period, but as time wore on, it became nearly impossible to continue working. The fear and tension Soutine endured aggravated his stomach ulcers, and his attacks grew more frequent and more severe. Finally, the pain became more than he could bear. He came out of hiding, risking capture by the Nazis, and was rushed to the hospital by his friends. Doctors rushed him into surgery due to a perforated ulcer. Soutine survived the operation, but he was too weak to recover. He died shortly afterward on August 9th, 1943. Soutine's art left an indelible impression on Dr. Barnes. In a letter to Paul Guillaume, Barnes once wrote, "In my mind, there is no doubt that Soutine will rank higher than any painter since Van Gogh." But Barnes wasn't the only one who experienced such a huge impact after seeing Soutine's work. Amedeo Modigliani, Soutine's friend and mentor, once described a particular state of euphoria he was experiencing by saying, "Everything dances around me as in a landscape by Soutine." I think it's no accident that Dr. Barnes hung this Modigliani painting titled "Girl with a Polka Dot Blouse" in the center of the wall with two Soutine landscapes dancing around it. And Willem de Kooning, the Dutch-American abstract expressionist artist who was greatly influenced by Soutine, once said, "I've always been crazy about Soutine, all of his paintings. Maybe it's the lushness of the paint. He builds up a surface that looks like a material, like a substance. There's a kind of transfiguration, a certain fleshiness in his work. I remember when I first saw the Soutines in the Barnes collection, the Matisses had a light of their own, but the Soutines had a glow that came from within the paintings. It was another kind of light." Chaïm Soutine found art at an early age and used it to improve his wellness and quality of life through childhood trauma, extreme poverty, physical illness, and religious persecution. Despite his challenges, he was one of an elite group of artists that helped change the meaning of the term School of Paris, or École de Paris, from a derogatory term to one that is used today to celebrate the most exceptional artists who worked in Paris in the early 20th century and who had the greatest impact on Western art. He is in the company of other artists like Amedeo Modigliani, Henri Matisse, Marc Chagall, and Pablo Picasso. At the Barnes Foundation, I've seen many people mesmerized and captivated by Soutine's paintings, but struggle with describing exactly why or what about them is so moving. But I think the author, Meryl Seacrest, offers one of the most beautiful descriptions of Soutine's work and offers a window into understanding why it leaves such a deep impact on so many. She says, "Soutine's landscapes do not unroll, they buzz and hum. Cityscapes shatter like kaleidoscopes. His portraits seize you by the throat. And his still lifes throb with the music of the universe." Thank you all so much for joining me tonight on this special 3-year anniversary virtual tour of going back to the Barnes Foundation and also learning a little bit about Chaïm Soutine. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I am very anxious and excited to talk to you more about what you think of Chaïm Soutine and read some of the comments in the chat. So give me a moment to open the chat here. It looks like, oh my goodness, there is a lot of chat messages here. Thank you all. And there are some questions. First, I want to thank all of you who joined in tonight and put in the chat where you were watching from. So let me just go down some of the lists here. Meryl and Tori in New York City. Hey, Meryl and Tori. Thank you so much for joining tonight. And have a wonderful time in Florida. I know you are all going over to Florida sometime soon.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome. Thanks again for joining.
Always.
And let's see, Anne and June Bishop are joining from Atlanta. Hello, Anne and June. Let's see, where else did we get some people? Jen from Haddon Township, New Jersey. Anne from Northern Virginia. Tori and family from Glassboro, New Jersey. Welcome, Tori and family. And I also want to just give a special thank you to Tori. She's one of the behind-the-scenes people tonight, and this is her first virtual tour with the Improving Lives Through Art series. So thank you very much, Tori, for all your help. Kim from Baltimore, Maryland. Anita in Glenview, Illinois. Wow, we're spread out all over the place here. So we had a few questions come in that you see posted in the chat here, which I'll talk about those first. And if anybody would like to join in here, let me take off my spotlight, and I'm going to put on the gallery view here. And if anybody would like to jump in and ask a question, go ahead and unmute your microphone and your video, and you can join right in. Also, by the way, if you're don't forget, stick around. We do have the trivia coming up in just a couple of minutes, and can't wait to see who will be the lucky winner of the ticket for next month's paint along. So, okay, so first question I see here is, if Soutine were alive today, how do you think he would respond to the current art world and its trends, especially the pieces where he used the animal carcasses? Yeah, that is that's a very interesting question. And, you know, I think, well, for example, the artist that I quoted near the end of the tour, Willem de Kooning, just a couple years ago at the Barnes Foundation, we had a special exhibit of Soutine and de Kooning's work. As I mentioned in the tour, de Kooning was very largely influenced by Soutine. And it was very interesting to see how de Kooning pushed those boundaries and that abstract expressionism even further. So I think Soutine would have enjoyed seeing the work of the other artists that he helped to inspire. Certainly would have enjoyed seeing the work of Munch, The Scream, another abstract expressionist masterpiece. So I think he was very forward thinking and would have enjoyed seeing that. So thank you for that question. And next question was, can you speak a little bit about the public's reaction to Soutine's works when they were first displayed in the Barnes Foundation compared to their reception today? Yes. So 1922, the year before Barnes bought all the Soutine paintings, he actually he didn't have his galleries yet and was not planning on opening his own galleries. He rented a space out in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And by that time, he had collected a lot of Renoirs and Paul Cézannes, a few Modiglianis. And he thought, I want to reveal these wonderful pieces to the rest of the art world. And this was 10 years after he started collecting. And of course, it was a horrible failure. The public was just not ready to see these abstract uses of shape and form and color. It was very jarring, as it was to Barnes when he first started. It immediately gave Barnes the label of an eccentric collector with all of this deviant art. And that is actually one of the main reasons why Dr. Barnes made the Barnes Foundation an educational institution. He didn't want that to happen ever again, what happened at that first exhibit. And he wanted to educate people about why this art was so significant. So I think by the time Barnes started bringing over the Soutines, they were already exposed to some of this post-impressionist and expressionist and cubist painting. So it did take a little time to warm up to them, but compared to today, like I mentioned at the end of the tour, people are immediately drawn to the Soutine paintings. You know, many times my live tour, I walk past Soutines to get to other paintings, and I always lose somebody who just looks at the painting and has to stop and say, who is that? Or you know, what is this painting? So there's something very visually captivating and intriguing to a lot of people. Last question in the chat here is, how did Soutine's technique evolve over time? And are there specific pieces in the Barnes collection that showcase this evolution? So, sadly, I mentioned this at the beginning of the tour, or at the beginning of Soutine's portion of the tour. There is no one like definitive biography of Soutine. Very little is known about his childhood. He spoke himself, he spoke very little of his life and his childhood. And even though he studied for 3 years in Lithuania and a few months in Minsk, no works survive from that period. All of the works seem to be, the earliest that I could find was 1919, 5 years after he arrived in Paris. So I mentioned in the tour that some accounts by friends were that he would, you know, kind of have these violent fits of rage and these kind of dark periods of depression. And most of his friends documented that he would often destroy his canvases and his works. So sadly, I think in those very sad states, he destroyed a lot of his early work. So it's really difficult to kind of see how his work evolved. They just sort of appear in this very abstract expressionist style. But we do know, as I showed in the tour, that he was very influenced by the traditional masters, Rembrandt and Jean Fouquet and others. So wonderful questions. Thank you so much for asking them. And let's see, I think I don't want to go too late here. I know we have, I cannot find the participants button, but I believe there's people still watching. I hope there's people still watching. Yes, there are people still watching. Okay. And I didn't hear anybody jump in. So if everybody's okay, I say, let's go to the trivia game. So this has become one of my favorite parts of the evening. If you have done this before with us, then you know how this works. If you are playing on your smartphone, you can continue to watch your Zoom screen here, and where you'll see the questions appear. But if you just scan this QR code with your smartphone, it should open a page in the browser on your phone where you'll be able to select your responses or your answers. So that is why I was explaining a little bit earlier. It's much easier to have the two devices to watch the questions pop up on the Zoom screen and then select your responses on your smartphone. And all right, it looks like we have a pretty good number of people here. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and start the game. Get ready, folks. Get your fingers ready. Here we go. The ILTA Back to the Barns and the Chaïm Soutine trivia. Here we go. First question. The four artists Dr. Barnes called the four pillars of the collection were Renoir, Cézanne, Matisse, and what other artist? Who is missing from this photo? Is it Amedeo Modigliani, Pablo Picasso? Whoa, oh, we already answered. Yes, most of you got that one correct. The fourth pillar is Pablo Picasso. Of course, we highlighted some of his work tonight. For the sake of time, I was not able to get to Paul Cézanne, but let's go ahead and see what the scores are. So first one all the way in the lead is Anne. Congratulations, Anne. By the way, I forgot to mention to everybody that besides the points being affected by selecting the correct answer, there's also a timing feature. So the person who selects the answer, the correct answer the quickest, gets more points. So try to answer as quickly as possible. So, all right, here comes question number 2. The part of the Russian Empire where Soutine was born is now known as what country? Is it Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, or Poland? The part of the Russian Empire where Soutine was born is now known as what country? Yes, most of you got that one as well. It is Belarus. It was called the area of the Russian Empire was called the Minsk Governorate when Chaïm Soutine was born, but it is now the country of Belarus. How were the scores affected? Whoa. Anne dropped down, but Anne in Atlanta rose up. And Anita and Tori are in a close second and third, but there's still time here, folks. This is a true and false one. Dr. Barnes flew to Paris in 1912 to make his first purchase of 33 paintings. True or false? Dr. Barnes flew to Paris in 1912 to make his first purchase of 33 paintings. True or false? 5 seconds left. It was false. His friend, William Glackens, flew to Paris in 1912 to make the first purchase. Oh, that was trickier than I thought. I thought everyone was going to get that one. Dr. Barnes went every time after that. He didn't want his friend to have all the fun in Paris. How was that affected here? Anne in Atlanta is on fire. Congratulations, Anne in Atlanta. Tori and Anne moved up again. She's don't count anybody out just yet. All right, here's number 4. For his painting Carcass of Beef, Soutine was creating a modern version of a painting by which Baroque artist? Was it William Orpin, Jean Fouquet, Rembrandt van Rijn, or Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin? Which artist created the original? No, most of you picked Jean Fouquet. It was Rembrandt. It was Rembrandt's slaughtered ox painting that Soutine was emulating. Boy, I didn't think I made them this tricky tonight. But all right, well, let's see who was really paying attention. Anne in Atlanta still on fire. All right, it's still anybody's game, folks. Let's go on to the halfway point. Number 5. According to Dr. Barnes, what are the 4 main elements of art? Color, light, pattern, texture, color, light, line, space, color, light, line, shape, or color, light, line, and space. Or contrast, light, line, and space. That's the one I missed. Oh, yeah, I think some of you fell victim to the most tricky one, the color, light, line, shape. It was actually color, light, line, space. Have to read those answers carefully, everybody. But 4 of you got it correct. Let's see who, man, Ann in Atlanta. This might be a runaway game, folks. I hate to call it so soon, but don't give up. Keep playing. I hope it's not wrong that I enjoy this game host way too much. All right, here we go. Number 6. Soutine's unique style of painting helped lay the groundwork for which artistic movement? His unique painting style helped lay the groundwork for which artistic movement? Cubism, post-impressionism, abstract expressionism, or symbolism? Yes, very good. Oh, we have a few different answers here. It was actually abstract expressionism. Edgar Munch was another abstract expressionist who we featured in this series, the very first ILTA series event. But yes, abstract expressionism was the correct answer. Anne in Atlanta retains her lead. It actually increases the lead a little bit from second and third place. But like I said, folks, we have 4 more answers to go, and it can go anyway. The original Barnes Foundation galleries were located in a small suburb outside of Philadelphia called Marion. True or false? A little bit easier. Original Barnes Foundation galleries were located in a small suburb outside of Philadelphia called Marion. True or false? People are still thinking. 3 seconds to go. And that's time, everybody. Yes, everybody got it correct who answered. It is true. It's a little town, little suburb of Philadelphia called Marion, or Lower Marion, and that is where the original galleries were built. So let's look at the scoreboard once again. Anne in Atlanta still on fire. And all right, folks, here we go. This whole game can change in the next 3 questions. Number 7. The nickname of the low-cost studio building where Soutine first lived in Paris is La Ruche, which means what? The beehive, the wasp's nest, the lion's den, or the bird's nest? What does La Ruche mean? 5 seconds. The beehive, the wasp's nest, that's hard to say, the lion's den, or the bird's nest? Ah, everybody got it correct. Yes, it's the beehive, La Ruche, because of the circular shape of the building. Congratulations to all of you. Anne in Atlanta retains the lead. Anne and Anita's creeping up. Here we go. I don't know. Anne in Atlanta, don't get too comfortable yet. Here's number 9. What did Dr. Barnes call the grouping of paintings and objects on the walls of the galleries? Symphonies, ensembles, collections, or a chorus? What did Dr. Barnes call? Well, that was fast. Yes, it was ensembles. Just like there are musical ensembles that create harmony, Dr. Barnes created visual ensembles for visual harmony. And let's see, everybody got it correct. Anne in Atlanta maintained the lead. But look down here, Tori Merrick just hit answer streak 3. So people are on fire. Here we go. It's going to be a photo finish. I can just feel it. Number 10. Soutine is part of a special group of artists who lived and worked in Paris in the early 20th century, known as what? The School of France, the School of Fine Arts, the School of Painting, or the School of Paris? Wow. More people answered the School of Fine Arts than the School of Paris. Yes, the École de Paris, or the School of Paris, is the name of that special group of artists that most of the art world considers to have had the most impact on Western art. So that was it, folks. Let's see what the standings are. Number 3, or third place, Anita. Congratulations, Anita. Number 2 is Anne. And number 1, of course, we all know it. Say it together, everybody. Anne in Atlanta. Congratulations, Anne in Atlanta. and cannot wait to see you at the paint-along next month, creating your own maybe abstract expressionist masterpiece. So with that, everyone, I would like to thank you once again for joining me this evening for this very special tour, for all of the wonderful comments in the chat, and want to thank the behind-the-scenes folks, of course, Gina Murdoch, Jen and Tori, for all of their hard work behind the scenes to make this series happen. And of course, once again, want to thank our wonderful sponsor, Sandoz, for making the entire Improving Lives Through Art series possible. Thank you, Sandoz, for your ongoing support of MSAA. And I hope to see all of you in December for our international tour of Poland, and next month for our paint along with Omaira Rivera-Filardi. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time. Bye-bye.